Okay, places everyone. We'll have to start the next session. Please take your seats. We are live online. Ladies and gentlemen, children, please take your seats. We need to get this session underway.
Attention! We are about to begin our next presentation. Everybody please take your seats and get ready. Jorgen Geerts, live from Quebec.
Welcome everyone, please take your seats. Jorgen Geerts is going to be presenting movement in VR. Thank you, Jorgen.
Hey, good morning everyone. I hope you enjoyed the great talks that we've seen so far, and I certainly enjoyed Andre's talk about, or Sergei's talk about what they're doing over the last couple of years. For those who do not know who I am, I'm the founder of Freedom360. We built the first fully spiritual video camera system a couple of years ago. And last year, based on the overwhelming demand on making actually 360 productions, we also founded Koncept VR, which is now one of the largest VR production houses in New York City. And we produce a great deal of productions every month. We have about 2 or 3 live productions every time. And using basically all the gear we have developed from Freedom360, dwelling on the experience that users like Ignacio, Sergey, and all the others, including Matthias Taubauer, for example, have built up on using over the last couple of years. So why do I think that movement in VR is important? We have a couple of companies out there, they say VR needs to be static. And for the very first time when I built a 360 system, I actually built the F360 system based on the need of having to move it. It came out of seeing Ryan Whitehead with an extremely cumbersome ladybug system with a very heavy backpack, struggling through doing walking shots with the ladybug. And I said, this can't be the thing. So we need to have movement to make this whole thing interesting. And it is also based on how our brains are processing depth and motion. The most important cue that our brains is using is what we call the binocular parallax or stereo vision. It is basically when the left eye and the right eye see different things, and therefore the brain can calculate the relative distance to that object, or the general 3D map, how I would call it in this context. It is all by itself, taken alone, a very strong thing, and does not require other senses here as well. So we see this in lots of stereo cameras. Tom Sharpless does great work with stereo, as well as Jane Fitzgerald did, and Felix and Paul. They all do very awesome, great stereo work, but it also has limitations. But stereo is only 1 out of 10 cues that our brain is using to calculate actually where we are in space when we look around. One important one that I like a lot is the monocular movement parallax, which is basically once we move our head or our bodies around, we create a stereo parallax just from one eye, and the brain can calculate based on this. It also uses overlapping objects, where you can see, for example, the person sitting behind you is you overlapping that person, and therefore my brain can see, okay, there's depth cues going on. Shades and shadows, light and dark, gives us more cues to this. One important other item is we have a brain, we have all the database in our heads, how large certain objects are. You all have, based on your daily experience, know approximately that this glass is about 12, 13, 14 centimeters large. So my brain can now compare the relative size on the retina to the current size that it's measuring and see, okay, if the 13 centimeter object is this far away, it's probably an arm length away. If it's getting that small, like over there, then now it's about 2 meters away, and so on. So it's based on experience. Other things are linear perspective, where when we see parallel lines and they converge towards the horizon, gives us another cue how far stuff is away. Accommodation and convergence are two senses or two data points that the brain has that are for very close-up objects. When the brain can actually measure how far do the eyeballs tilt inwards and know basically, okay, now I have something really close to my face, as well as the deformation of the lens that it has to use to focus actually to this close-up distance. Other important things are details, or how it's called also a texture gradient, where you can clearly see on the carpet, I see lots of details in the foreground on the carpet, but the further away, the more mushier the texture gets, and you just see general patterns, and this is another clue of how we can calculate this. This is also one of the effects that with the fake tilt shift photography that we're seeing, that we're messing basically with the perception of the brain. Is where we see something that doesn't have enough texture in it, therefore the brain thinks it's on a different plane. That's why tilt shift photography works in a certain sense. Aerial perspective, or generally haze, is another thing, is when stuff gets just lower contrast, we generally regard it as needs to be far away in general. So all of those cues are building a 3D map in our brain, and I think should be used in the context of movement and VR, because they give us a very rich experience on how the world is around us. Using a static example that we've showcased outside during this week is a shot that had basically no movement in there and no cuts in this context. But we still can use different elements here from the previous thing. For example, we can see the occlusion of the foreground to the background. So I don't need to shoot this scene basically in stereo to tell the viewer that this neck of her base is way in front of the blackboard, for example. From general experience, also many people know roughly that the neck of a base is about this size. So when you see this in VR, it gives you another cue like how close is she actually to you. Same thing as this exclusion, what we talked earlier, using in this composition, for example, the white sheet here to occlude some stuff behind us when they want to walk behind it. So all of this gives me a 3D map of the scene without having to shoot this in a stereo field. Looking back in the theory of filmmaking, how we use actually a movement in camera to tell a story. And some of those movements actually translate well into VR, and some of them absolutely do not translate it very well. The tilt up and down, pan left and right, is basically gone in VR because we have everything all around us, so we cannot use a camera movement in this context to tell a story, to bring something into the frame or out of the frame. This doesn't exist anymore. So the major movements that are left out for us, the same as zoom in and zoom out. We don't have that feature in most VR experiences, at least not right now. We may get it in the future. So movements that we are restricted to is basically what's called dolly in, dolly out, which is a forward or backwards movement. You have truck left and right, moving left up and down, as well as the elevator going up and down, or any mixture of all of those together. Those are some examples what has been done over the last couple of years to how do we actually execute those motions. And some examples from Airpano, from Matthias Taubwalder, from Joe Donovan's team, from Dubai 360. Ignacio does a great deal of camera motion, as we've seen yesterday, as well as, for example, the team from Henry in London, Visualize. So all of those are good examples that were done over the last couple of years and showed us a great experience, how exciting it can be to move in VR. The very first one, or an early piece that Matthias Taubwalder did, was a helmet cap mount at the Lauberhorn run. And generally, I'm not a huge fan of moving a camera on a helmet with the person, because it sort of simulates a first-person view, in my opinion. But it has a technical challenge that is related to that humans are not chickens. If you look at camera stabilization chicken on YouTube, you notice that when you take a chicken and move its body in space, the head will stay perfectly at the same spot in 3D. Humans can't do this, unfortunately. And if you watch helmet cam footage, you notice small twitching movements around. And those small twitching movements translate not well in a VR experience, because it is a movement that your brain cannot predict and calculate. If I have a slow-moving movement in VR, my brain can accept, okay, I'm moving slowly in VR, or I'm moving fast in VR. But if I have those tiny movements in there, there's an input mismatch from the inner ear to the eye, or the visual cortex, and the eye sees, oh, there's something is moving, but the inner ear does not give the same feedback to it. So as soon as the brain has two different inputs, it gets angry, and you get motion sick. That's sort of like the input. So why the Lauberhorn run was actually successful in this context is because the athlete had to do one thing: just go down the hill on skis very fast. And if you go down the hill very fast, you cannot look anywhere. It's not a sightseeing trip. You go down the mountain. He had to just focus straight on where he's going, and he held his head very, very still. Not perfect, but still very good. So it was a very exciting experience, because he won actually the Lauberhorn run years before, and he finished, I think, only 6 seconds slower than the actual winner that year. And he said, well, I could have been faster if I didn't have that stupid red camera in my hand that I had to carry, as well as the camera on my hand. So it was a very exciting thing, and it also showed the viewer how exciting it is to go fast downhill on skis. Another motion that's still in the family of body attached camera holders is what Ignacio and I developed over the last couple of years, is what we call the dead parrot, or the shoulder mount. It works only in situations where you are moving forward in a way that you don't introduce additional bounce into the motion. That's why I said, if I have those small twitchy motions, we will really want to avoid this. So this mount works relatively well on skis. It works pretty good on bicycles, as long as you somehow keep it under control. And it also allows us to do a third-person view of the rider itself. So it takes us into the story, makes us part of the experience that the rider has, and the rider or the wearer actually has to act it out as well. One of the examples where we used it actually was the Ili video. Ili is an Australian hip-hop artist. Some say he's the only Australian hip-hop artist. And it was filmed in New York, and the filmmakers really liked the little planet effect on this, or the director. And they said, okay, how can we film this whole experience in 360 as a full sphere and then do the little planet effects in post-production? And one of the things that we really wanted to do as a camera crew was we need to show motion, we need to show dynamic action in that video, because otherwise it's a music video for hip-hop and it needs to move, basically. So we did that parrot mount for him here, and he was riding around all across Brooklyn. Was very exciting. Could have been a little bit smoother in theory, but he hasn't been on a bike for 15 years before that take. So, and it was like a little blue bike that was a little bit hard to ride sometimes. But it turned out it was very dynamic shots in there, and it made basically him the star and let him really act it out. As Ignacio has shown yesterday, the third of my favorite body cam attachment is actually just holding it on a stick with a gyroscope attached to the end. And the same things apply that we just learned. You still need to maintain a very smooth movement in the video in there. This was a promo video we did for a travel agency, and part of the experience was to ski in Dubai, because people like to do this over there and they don't have access to like nice Alps or so. And it also, skiing is another activity. If you just consider yourself a camera platform, which you are at this point, you just go smoothly down the hill and try to use the scene or the talent that is around you as the subjects. You're just a glorified camera dolly with a brain. Walking with it is a little bit more tricky and requires a little bit more experience or training. Ignacio showed how the models on the beach actually managed it, but it's a very short take that you can do. The system is relatively hard to handle and heavy on your arms. I'm usually saying after 10 minutes of handling the camera system, I need to take a break and I'm done for a while. If I have to do a very long take for 20 minutes, I'm like, no, that's it for the day. Not doing more of this. On this shots, we were on location, had to do everything on the fly, everything pretty much impromptu. Nothing was much scripted for that piece. It was more a collection, slightly a spray and pray approach to gather as much scenes later for the edit. And one of the scenes was basically, okay, how can we document the experience that people have on the big Chinese wall, or one of the segments. So I actually walked up on the stairs just to show like how it is, what's the experience there. And I thought, how hard can it be just to walk a couple of stairs? And was happily storming up the stairs, and then after like 3 minutes, my lungs said, yeah, that's fine, goodbye. Go on without me, we stay here. And I sort of like, no, I need to take a break and reset myself. And fortunately, within those segments I was able to film, there was enough experience here. And this motion, also this composition goes back into what we said earlier about why motion in VR is important. Because we have several other clues that we talked about earlier here. One of the big ones is basically the haze that we see in the background. It gives us a huge 3D clue, basically, how far, how wide the space is that we're dealing with. We have immediate occlusions and shadows with the notches in this thing. So when you experience this, this gives you also a very good experience, like how wide are the stairs, how steep are the stairs, how far do we need to go up. And all of this basically gives you a good VR experience. This was another scene from the same week where I felt that taking a walking shot through that ancient village in China and showing how the street looks like would give us a good experience. Some of the doors that we saw here were actually open and lit inside, were people inside as well, so giving a good left and right depth to the shot, while using the linear perspective of having a very straightforward framing of the VR, basically the left and right, here acts sort of like as a rail going forward, giving me some distance, how far do we go actually in this? Another class of moving shots are probably one of the earliest or simplest one. We attach it to a car and can be done on the inside, can be done on the outside, can be done with driver, without driver. So for this example, we were in Dubai and had to film a segment about an experience called dune dashing. When you take these overpowered SUVs, you deflate the tires and the driver just goes crazy on the dunes as fast as possible. This segment actually didn't make it into the final cut, mainly because it didn't feel good in VR, not because of the motion that was happening in there, but it was lacking lots of the depth cues. The sand on the day, because we shot roughly midday, had very little shadows. So we could not really see how far away is the next dune. What kind of dimension do we talk to? We had no reference points. There was nothing in there that could tell us, okay, other than those little plants that were occasionally there, but there were not that many of them in the sand. So we felt like while the motion was interesting, the reference points were lacking, and therefore it wasn't a good experience. If this would be more roller coaster, or there would be more objects that I can relate in terms of size and more 3D, it probably would have been better. Other experiences where we actually have objects that give us a size reference, including Jay Leno's chin, are a little bit easier to handle. And this was a promo video we did for his car show that went actually from YouTube to a cable channel, to a cable network. And we used, again, several things. How do we have the relative closeness of him? And him driving in that monster car that he built through LA, it was also different clues. We always know like how large is our cars on average. And it gives us a reference how large is this car actually. So we are about 2 car lengths versus 1 car length and other cues like this. Plus when it drives, it gives us a little bit of vibration because it's a very heavy engine. So we got some vibrations actually through the carbon fiber pole and into it. So it felt like this is a big, important, or a big engine that added to the experience. Other important camera movement techniques that Sergey also dwelt on a little bit are drones. You can fly drones in many scenes. This is Ignacio in Senegal. This is easy, we don't need to go through permits in this context. If you try the same thing in New York City, it's slightly more difficult, if not impossible. But it allows you to do the elevator shots that we talked about earlier, just the pedestal, just going from the ground and giving us this growing and growing overview about where we are, and just allowing us to take in the scenery is very important for filmmaking and storytelling, because it shows us where we are, what's the context of what's the next story that's coming up. And the drones can range from smaller drones to larger drones to whatever you can take with you. And how good your pilot is and how large your crew is, basically. The next level up is what also they mentioned, is different styles of using actual helicopters when possible. This was for the Canadian Space Agency documentary. And we also needed an establishing shot. We didn't have a drone around, and the easiest was basically to convince the pilots that did actually the recovery of the balloon that we launched, and said, hey, before we actually pick up the balloon and the leftovers, can we do a quick flyover with the helicopter just to get the overview about to see where did the balloon land, where did the gondola land, and just show us basically how it is in relationship to the woods as well.
Jorgen, one question. For that kind of shoot, do you use a stabilizer as well in the pole, or is not necessary?
Yes. So at the end of this pole, and this is not fully extended here, is also a gyroscope at the end. So if you attach anything to a helicopter, there's a very strong vibration happening. So you need to use your body basically to decouple any sort of vibration that's coming from the helicopter engine into the camera system. Plus, it also helps you to prevent a little bit the motion that the helicopter has in the air, because helicopters never stand still. Even if they hover, they always float a little bit in the air. And the gyroscope helps you to actually prevent that motion a little bit. So if you are actually using a gyro in a helicopter, you will notice that this thing seems to move in your hands all by itself. But in reality, it is the helicopter around you that's moving, and the gyroscope stays in space. And last week, Matthias Tauchwalder decided to let's see how more stable we can do a helicopter shot. So his team actually built a torpedo that weighs probably 300, 400, 500 kilos and floats about 50 meters under the helicopter. And this gives a super stable 360 flight that they used for the Gotthard 360 documentary. Also, the aerial is also used here as an establishing shot to show where is the Gotthard tunnel in Switzerland, and then leading up to the story of, okay, now we take a VR experience through the 60 kilometer tunnel under it. And the results were actually extremely good. I was very impressed by how nice and stable that shot was. For Sergei, probably it doesn't travel well.
Can we watch the footage online somewhere?
Yes, it's all on YouTube. Another motion that is very practical and easy to set up are cable cam shots. Ignacio showed this also this week, where we used an Explorer, for example, put a cable through it, span it through 2 points, and then use means to basically pull it from A to B. We used this recently on a shoot for the Metropolitan Museum, and this is the Temple of Dender, which is a gift from the Egyptian government, somewhere in the 50s. And the museum built basically a great hall just for this temple. And it is rather large, and we used basically the camera motion here to depict the size of it in VR, because if we would have just have placed static cameras in VR, for example, here in the center or here in the plaza, we would have missed all the clues, like how large is it? What's the expanse of it? What is the original architecture of this place? So we decided if we actually move the camera along this blue line here, we would get a rather good motion of revealing different arches, the depth of this space. So for this production, we did actually 2 shots. And you can see this on YouTube and Facebook. It's under the Match channel. And the secondary shot was from the opening behind this door, then just going across the water that is underneath this archway. So we used 2 shots to reveal how it is coming from this angle into the room, and then the other one going parallel to the large windows that are here on the side. And both shots were basically used to explain the 3D geometry of the space. Other options how to do cable cam shots are with traditional cable camera rigs, also pretty good remote controlled, relatively easy to handle when you need to go a little bit further. So we use those basically if you do very long shots like 500 meters or even up to 1 kilometer if you are able to do a cable between 2 points. When we come actually to the human space and actually deal with actors and talents in the shot, we would need to be able to repeat shots, because it's usually actors and talent can't get it right the first time, or you're unhappy with their performance, so you need to redo shots. With the cable cam shots earlier, On this one, you basically need to reset the camera, bring it back, and pull the camera again. Fortunately, we can do this at a constant speed, so all you need to do is work out the timing for any talent that's in the shot, and give them just audio cues additionally. Like if the camera is at this point in the room, you start working from there, or you deliver your lines. And when the camera is over there in the room, then the next talent could come, for example. We can also do this with camera-controlled dollies by now. The disadvantage here that we're dealing with additional post-processing, because all of this stuff that we see down here, the rails, the dolly itself, is actually in the shop, and we need to basically remove this with an additional plate and additional work. So it's a question of post-processing.
Sorry, 2 days?
Hmm?
2 days, you said?
2 days, it depends on. But you can do the same thing, basically just moving the whole rail system occasionally over, doing a plate shot from the ground, and then putting it back into place. And you can do this a couple of times during the day, depending on how you need to do that shot and that setup. And what G-Works is pretty good in this context. Their dolly system is remote control from iPad and fully controlled, so you can do perfectly frame accurate repeats of the same take over and over again. And if you want to go more into the flat space movement, we're also going to start reselling the Mantis 360, which is a dolly system developed in the UK, or a rover system actually. And it's heavily stabilized also with the Canyon Labs gyroscope. So it's basically the same gear that we use on the other shots. Now we're putting it on a rover, and that allows us to move not in a linear fashion, at least on a flat floor. And so those were all basically, I would call it two-dimensional movements, if we take out the drones out of the equation. But we can also use camera cranes as well as spider cams to have actually a more programmable three-dimensional move through space, and then have a larger setup with this. The setup was used to promote the new Adidas football for the Brazilian World Cup, and it was used to shoot the parts of the plates that were then used in 3D animation in there. And the spider cam is attached to 4 long cables along the line in the stadium, and allows you to do up to certain levels, so you do your elevator shots as well as your plane shots, and move freely around and follow certain subjects as well as change height of the camera. Where a camera crane is a little bit more limited and would still require some form of either totally ignoring the camera crane in the shot or hoping that nobody will look necessarily behind you. This was a production by Louis Smithingham and Brent Schnarr at NAB, and it was actually a pretty good experience as a live preview of what camera movement on stage in 360 will actually look like. And those are some examples of camera movements in VR that we've seen so far. I'm pretty sure there should be many more. Generally, all those movements have the same in common. You need to try to keep them as smooth as possible, but speed and direction doesn't really matter. We can go as fast as necessary or as fast as the story requires us to go. They're always used within the storytelling of VR as the establishing shots, the connecting shots to basically tell us where we are and where we're going to. And I always encourage you to, if you are in VR productions, use motion, don't be afraid, and see it as a challenge for your filmmaking. Thank you.
Any questions?
Thank you, Jonathan. When you're shooting like drone, how was the stabilization used? In particular, facing sky.
So the question is, how do we stabilize a drone shot? And my preferred method at the moment was to use a heavy drone and use the drone itself as stable as possible. So when you fly, actually, I would not try to fly against the wind. I would try to just have the whole drone drift with the wind, not to put additional forces onto the drone itself. Sometimes that's possible, sometimes you just have to fly in a certain direction. Sergey just showed a very lovely little stabilizer that they developed to help with the little twitching motions of the drones that are always induced in there, but we can also do a lot in post by now.
Have you rigged positional sound recording devices to small rigs?
Positional sound in VR, yes. You can attach additional binaural microphones to the rig itself or to the pole under the camera. There's lots of hiding spaces for it. I personally see them only as a starting point for your sound edit, so it creates a good bed to put additional on. I prefer to rely more on point sources that are placed across the scene to get as much as distinct sounds in there as possible, so the sound designer has a chance to go in and sort of like help with the directionality of the sound, because a binaural microphone has only so much, I would say, audio resolution that you have in there, and having additional sources from far away or further away gives me a clearer signal from that, as well as an easier way to position that in the sound mix as well. But it's always like what you have on set and use as much as you can. And in the worst case scenario, you have to go back to the GoPro sound channels.
Right here. In the beginning, you mentioned different cues that we use for promotion. As you know, sometimes there's a lot of motion sickness from certain movements. What do you think about the new the aesthetic drift by Samsung that stimulates the inner ear to fool you into perceiving rotation or motion?
Yes, that is basically comes back to the missing data that the brain needs to calculate certain things. We talked earlier about how if you have a visual cortex input mismatch to the inner ear mismatch, and the additional audio cues seem to really help you to stimulate the inner ear and give me that missing input. But in general, motion sickness comes more from the small motions that cannot be predicted rather than the large motions.
Good. Are you aware of any experiments with what you might call non-physiological motions in VR, such as zoom, to purposely disorient or change the perception of the subject? And if not, do you foresee any future for such things?
I do foresee a great future for this, for the whole field of horror movies in VR. We're doing this unexpectedness of where stuff are in VR. It's really going to play a great deal with, like, I did not see that monster coming from behind me, or didn't really hear it until the very last moment.
With the kind of apparatus that you showed us, which would you say is the most versatile and recommended as, say, the first to get into?
First to get into, I would still say the Ricoh Theta, just to experiment. Most versatile, probably F360 Classic at the moment, because it gives you full sphere at 6K60, but it requires a certain amount of training as well as stitching skills. with it. So it is not the super easiest rig to deal with, but the color software and the video stitch software have proven actually to be very reliable in this context. And recently, it has become industry standard actually in Nuke as a stitching template as well. Other rigs, there are plenty of other rigs. Each rig has its own purpose. Each rig has its own flavor and use. And I cannot say there's one rig to do everything. Does not exist at the moment. It is a mixture between different things that work in certain situations.
Okay, thank you very much, Jürgen.
Yeah, thank you.
Stay tuned, everybody. Uli is coming up next.
Coming up in a few minutes. Orchestrating stories in VR.
Reading people. Reading.
Yeah. You have your own layers.
Because
yeah, and it's really sure that's So I was just thinking like build something that has several layers and overlays and stuff and yeah.
Now it's I don't so we will wait for weeks. But now the Panoramic.
Well, you can play around with that. You can take a look at it. Play around with it.
Yes, we do.
Alright. Do you want? Because it has a lot of other possibilities. There's some people who say to experiment, so guys to play around with it. If you want to use it, that we would not charge you like Thank you. So, I thought that you were air company. It's a different company.
No, I'm
Yeah. Why does it take care
Okay, places everyone? Welcome to Koncept VR.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Good morning, everyone.
Places. Thank you.
So I don't know how many know me personally. I'm Uli Kuczyk from Koncept VR. I'm the COO and also the COO and co-founder of Freedom360. So I'm in this business basically as long as Jürgen is. I will talk a little bit about orchestrating stories for VR. There are some stories, some articles going around, or some comments sometimes where people say, oh, I just need to put the camera down. Just put it down in the place and it does all by itself. That's not what VR is. It will never do that, and there's always more involved. There's always more involved in real filmmaking. So I will tell a little bit about our experience in actually doing productions in VR. I go a little bit over some terms, and then I go into some case studies. And then try to go to the next. Oh. So the gist of it is that there's people coming right now from the film industry, there are people from the panorama industry, and they're getting into VR. And they're all professionals in their own field. They know a lot about their own field, they know a lot about how, for example, to create a panorama, they know a lot about how to create a great story for a movie. But this doesn't necessarily translate into VR. There are definitely more skills involved and different kinds of skills involved for VR. So some of that means we need to unlearn what we have learned. Because certain skills will work differently and certain stuff doesn't work at all. So we cannot just go along with as I said, you don't just put the camera down. You have a lot more considerations to take into account. We introduce new dynamics with VR, and that means we have new challenges as well. And those challenges can be separated into about, and I put them loosely into three categories, which I call conceptual, creative, and technical. So on the conceptual side, we need to define the role of the viewer, as we have already heard from what's his name, from Felix and Paul, I'm sorry. So we need to define the role of the viewer. We always do this also in film. We need to define how we want to present the story to the viewer, but now the viewer is actually in the story. So that becomes a lot more intimate, and we need to take a lot more care of the viewer than we do in regular film. And in the end, the role of the viewer will be the role of the camera as well. So where I place the camera, how high I place the camera, how close I place the camera will determine what role the camera plays and will reflect on the viewer. Another thing that, another point I want to make about conceptual is that we need to think about the set a lot more than we do in regular film. We have no frame anymore, we have the full 360 set. And the set plays a bigger role. We want to convey something through the set, otherwise why would we go 360? So there is something in the set we want to use, and the set is a character in and of itself. On the creative side, this goes back to, I cannot just put the camera down in one place and have some action in front. So I cannot go with regular film techniques, but action will be frontal. I will have to think about action around the camera. I want to make it interesting. There will always be a main focus, a main action, because we want to follow the story, but there will be other things to discover around So we will have another character doing something in the background. This might or might not be important to the story, but it fills up, it fills the story, it makes it more dimensional. One of the creative challenges that we view is what Irene was already talking about yesterday. How do we direct and guide the focus and attention? And she already mentioned a very good tool that they developed with the forced perspective. But we also have other tools in VR that we can use. We have sound, and we can also guide the viewer by motion through the frame. We can guide the viewer by sound clues from behind, so that the viewer actually will look to the other side. You can guide the viewer by using other characters in the experience that will turn their attention to a certain point, so we will turn our attention to the same point. And in the technical challenges, cameras are obviously still one of the big challenges that we have. And as Jürgen mentioned already, we will not have one camera that does it all. We will always have a set of cameras for different situations. Do we want an easier to use camera? Of course, everyone wants to get faster to the result. We want to concentrate on the story. We want to concentrate on what makes the project exciting. We don't want to probably go into the camera and why doesn't this work? Why doesn't this work? Or how do I do this right now? So this is still part of the big learning curve of VR, because the camera system not just one button click and you have everything. But basically, that goes back to film cameras as well. You never will have one click, you will always have a set of tools. Staging becomes very important in VR. So what I mean with that is basically one of the challenges is we don't have our behind the scenes. Everything is in front of the camera. We cannot hide anything. So every additional equipment, every additional crew, we need to find a solution where to go, where to put it, how to hide it, how to make it look natural. And then one of the other challenges that Jürgen already talked about is camera motion. And as we said at Koncept, we're very big proponents of motion. So I think Jürgen gave you a good overview of that already. I want to show you a couple of new rules that we discovered while producing VR experiences. And they might apply sometimes. Rules are there to be broken, but those are the general rules. Sometimes we want to break them to get to a certain effect, but in general we want to start out with if we have our rectangular stitched movie, we want to put the main action into the center. We put it into the center because this is how the movie starts when we put on the headset. So the viewer will look at that point first. And it's always, we also want to keep this point, so if we don't use forced perspective, or if we don't use it if you're still in one scene where the forced perspective is not applied until the next cut, we want to give the viewer a chance to go back to the main action, and it's easiest if the main action is always in the same place. So we put it in the center, the viewer will always start in the center, looking at the main action. Another rule that we apply to our experiences is that we want the direction of motion towards the center. That feels most natural when we have the headset on. It feels like we're moving forward. It feels a little bit weird if we're moving backward. That's not natural. We as a human being, want to turn around and see where we're actually going. And sideways might work sometimes, but general rule, start out with moving, looking in the direction you're moving in. And then the last kind of rule or idea that we discovered while shooting VR is the subject distance is one of the most important tools that we have in VR. the closer a subject is to the camera, the more important we will assume this character is. The character takes up a lot more space in our 360, and we will probably look at that character. So if a character is closer by, we assume it's more important. If a character is in the background, it might be less important for that scene. Doesn't mean it's not a main character. They might move in and out, closer and further away from the camera. So several techniques that are used for filmmaking need some rethinking to be applied in the VR space. And I think one of the most important ones is composition. Because we have this full field of view, we have the all-around field of view, we need to think about where do I put my action, where do I put the set pieces, where do I put the other characters. Can I put something that reveals something about the motion, say about the story in the background, like a poster that tells me this character actually likes this band or something like that. So we can hide clues all over. So the set is very important, and the composition of the set and the shot is very important. The choreography goes right with that. I need to tell the actors where to go, and as I said, if they're moving closer, that means they're more important. If they're moving away, it means at the moment they're less important. We might still follow them, they might still do something interesting, but that gives us the chance to, I mean, that's why we have VR, we can always rewatch it and then go watch another character do something that we missed. Lighting becomes a little bit more complicated. We need to hide everything. So a big kino flow on the stage doesn't work. Unless you're filming a band and it is supposed to be there. It is part of the experience, which we also did with our Absolute Vodka experience. But if you're filming a story, you usually want to use ambient light, practical lights, natural lights, or find a clever way to hide the lights. As it was mentioned a lot over the week already, sound becomes a very important tool in VR. The soundscape gives us clue where we are, gives us clue what's happening behind us, gives us clue if the action moved to a different area, so we have to turn and look at that area. Motion again, Jörg already said how we use the motion, so I'm just putting it for completeness. And one part that we need to rethink for VR is editing. There are some proponents that say you don't edit in VR because you disorient the viewer. I'm all for editing, but we need to be careful and we need to make the editing, give the viewer more time. So we put the viewer in a scene, we need to give the viewer time to be in that scene, adjust to the scene, and actually be able to look around. So editing usually is way slowed down. And again, everything are general rules, you might break them for a specific effect. So if you want to achieve something in particular, have a reason to break that rule and achieve that effect. I will start now talking a little bit about experiences that VR production, the Koncept VR did over the last year, and some of the challenges that we faced while doing those experiences. And I separated them into 3 parts. So let's talk about what actually, what was happening. So the client comes to us, wants to have a piece, which we call caregiver here, it had a different name later on. It was supposed to be a one-shot experience, one shot, one take. It was supposed to induce empathy, of course. It was supposed to convey a certain story. And we didn't have a lot of, I mean, it was one shot, so we don't have a lot of time to tell the story. We don't have a lot of, we cannot cut to certain things as we would do in regular film. We would maybe cut close to something that is important to that story. We cannot do this. We have one shot, and we have the same. This was a stationary camera, so that means everything had a certain distance, and the distance besides the people who walked in and out didn't change for the objects. We also needed to convey the relationships between the characters within the first couple of seconds. So what is the setup, what is the story, how do they relate to each other? Then while the story moves along, we never moved the camera from the center position where it was, but action was happening in a different area, so we need to direct the viewer to this area somehow. So those are the challenges with the story. On set, this particular story had a big challenge with the set. And with basically every set you have in VR, you have to deal with what is there. Of course, you dress up the set, you put props there and here, remove stuff, try to hide the ugly stuff, make it look, unless you want to go for the near shot. But in general, when you put a camera in a location, you have less options than you have with a film camera, because you have everything. So you just need to, again, you decide, this is important for the story, I need to get closer to this area. This area doesn't really work for my story, how can I hide this area, what can I do? It's a lot harder if you have to consider the full 360 set. One of the story points was that we see different family members in the space. They are not interacting with each other, they're all doing separate activities. So this set needed to be able to have places where people could actually do different things. So first idea was having a TV and have the family sit on the TV, and then we see the open kitchen layout and see the other half of the family being in the kitchen. That didn't work for this story, mainly because we couldn't find the sets that we envisioned. So we were plotting down what should the set be for this story? How can we actually have those storylines, those points that we want to convey? How can we actually make this happen in a real location? And one of those points was also we needed to have a wheelchair in the scene. That is a very difficult part because you need a lot of open space for this. We found a location and we made it work, but we adapted. In the end, we need to adapt the story to the location that we had. And another important thing that's always one important challenge is that we cannot, if we work with actors, we actually would like to see their performance, we would like to see hear the dialogue, we want to see where they're going. All we can do in VR is first, of course, practice and watch them be in the scene while they're doing the scene. And the next thing is we need to find a way to monitor the actors out of the frame, so in a different room. It usually means you have to lay down wires between the cameras and into a different room where we are and try to see as much as possible. And in addition to that, we have clients, directors on set. They really want to see what's happening. They don't want to fly blind. It's really, the biggest question is, I need to see this now. For most people, this is the first time they do a VR production. So they need to see what's actually happening. After a while, if this is the third, fifth experience, they might come down, but still, you need to monitor the actors. So one is a live monitoring system to another room. The other part is to, after you actually filmed the take, you go and have someone on set stitching right away. So you get a preview of the actual scene. You can zoom in onto the actors. You can zoom in on the different performances. So let me show the set that we finally came up with. So we have an open floor layout. We have this one. We have the dining table over here. We have the kitchen island in the center. And we have another seating area back behind the kitchen. We have 4 characters in this scene right now. We have a boy doing some homework. We have a girl in the background being on her phone. Later she's taking selfies, so she is not very involved with the family. And we have the father cleaning up, preparing some food, and the mother coming home, bringing in some groceries. So this is our establishing shot. We already see the 4 members of the family. We see that the mom is hardworking. We see that the father is helping out with the household. And we have 2 school-age children, one doing their homework, the other playing with the phone. So what else do we have in the shop? This is a wide area. As I said, we needed a wide area to accommodate a wheelchair. I'll show you that in a second. Right away, we see there is a work area set up and the laptop. And this is actually the area closest to the camera. This is centered on camera. So we will know whatever is happening will be happening over here. That's the main action. So, and mom sits down at the kitchen table, so she's the main character. One thing that we sometimes hear is that you cannot enter a frame or exit a frame in VR because you see everything, but you actually can enter and exit a frame if you have a physical obstruction. So you can have, we have a wall here, so right now the grandmother is entering the frame from the side. So we add another character into our story. So the next part in the story, so the dad is cleaning up the groceries over here. So we see him moving. We see mom started working on the computer. We see the girl moving around in the background, but still she barely acknowledged that the mother came home. And we see the boy moved his bags actually out of the way for grandmother. This gives us a clue, and the boy then interacts with the grandmother and tells her he will help her to get where she needs to be going, and she says, no, thank you, I'm fine, I need to learn this. So we have got 2 clues right now here. We got the dialogue, so we know the action moved from here over here, because the boy was talking to the grandmother. And then the boy also moved the bags out of the way, which means this is a very new arrangement with the grandmother here. So we got a couple of clues, everything in one frame. Yes, we would have the same clues with a regular film, but we might have actually zoomed in on the work area, or we might have had a close-up where the bags are when the grandmother move closer. We need to have this all in one frame, and it's still working. So we can have similar plot devices than we have with the film, but what we don't have is actually a close-up shot. Or we cannot get a shot and a counter shot. So we don't have a shot of the mother, and then we go over to the grandmother and back to the mother. But we can direct the attention because the boy is talking, so we know something else is happening. Now, when the grandmother starts moving, our attention will follow her. That's natural. We will follow the motion in any frame. So now we're moving our attention back to the center frame. And then we have the conclusion where the grandmother tells the mother, take a break and relax, because all of those builds are actually grandmother's new builds, living with the new family. So we convey a lot of emotion in a very, very short frame. We had a very difficult set because we had a lot of people in the set. We had a wheelchair in the set that again adds some complexity. And we needed to do it all in 360. And it worked pretty well, and I tell you the part that didn't work so well. So we had to do some compromises. The only part that we were not quite satisfied with is that we had this side of the frame. We would have liked something happening there, or something more interesting besides shopping bags. So that's the part, where we couldn't fill up, but we don't always need to fill up the frame. We had all the layers. We had the front layer, we had an intermediate layer of action, an intermediate layer of action with the dad, and a background action with the daughter. Now let's move on to a completely different VR experience. Last year in September, I think, we shot a piece for the musical School of Rock. It's one of Andrew Lloyd Webber's new pieces, and they wanted to promote the musical starting on Broadway in New York with this piece. The song they wanted to shoot was I'm in the Band, and this was supposed to be shot in one single take, no cuts, so we need to make sure that the action that we place around the camera will be manageable in post. And we know about post, we have to stitch, and we want to get rid of all the seam lines. So we were very aware of the seam lines, and we were very aware of what the camera will capture and where it has to be. And the actors were instructed to be in certain areas and don't stop in other areas, so that we actually can achieve a good stitch afterwards. So we still want to, of course, it's 360. This is also shot with a stationary camera. So we want to have some action going around the cameras to make it interesting. We don't want the actors, this performers just standing in front of the camera and singing. We want to still movement around the camera, but this needed to be really controlled to make the post-production possible, to make it a good experience, don't have breaks, don't have children with half faces, and so on. The song length was about 5 minutes, and the resetting time for getting the set back to its initial position, everything took about an hour. So we were limited by, it took about 1.5 hours for each take. So we gotten about 10 to 8 takes. I think the first couple takes were just music, trying to see if all the kids were singing live and the main character was singing live. So the first couple takes were just for the music, so we ended up, I think, with 6 takes for the whole performance for one day. Additional challenges were posed by having a really, really short pre-production time. We were basically called that week, can you help us? And we said, yes, we can help you, which brought us a couple of sleepless nights to figure everything else that they needed us to do on set. Another one of those challenges, of course, is to condense the whole Broadway stage into a classroom. On the Broadway stage, you can go back, forward, wherever you like. In the classroom, you don't have those kinds of motion. You have motion around the camera as you place the camera in the center of the room, but it is limited. And then we also got, we had one day where we practiced. So during the day, we got the request, how close can we get to the camera? Can we get the children closer to the camera? How close can we get? Oh, so we did that take, we stitched it, we looked at it. Yes, that's still safe. Then the next take went a step closer. can we do this? At one point, we had to say, no, you're getting too close, we cannot stitch, you're getting into the parallax areas, you're going wrong. So there was a lot of practice involved also to make this choreography work for this piece. And again, there were directors and producers involved. We had actually Andrew Lloyd Webber on set for the actual shoot day. They want to see the action, so we needed to provide a live preview, and we provided a live stitching preview in the room next door. That gave us a couple of challenges because since there were performers, were no cables on the floor. So all the cables need to go all on the ceiling around the room. We were glad that there were grips on site that actually helped us with the cables, but we still had to do a lot of ourselves to get a bundle of cables into the next room on the ceiling. And then again, we did quick stitches to review the performances on set. So let's take a look at this set. So here we have the opening shot of the School of Rock musical. The room doesn't look like a classroom anymore because the teacher was moving stuff around and hiding stuff, so we don't know what's under here yet. Children are entering and they're going actually left and right of the camera at that moment. So we already have to move around the camera. And then they will set up all around the room, so we have some children everywhere. And can someone tell me how we actually help the actors here to stay within one camera?
Marks in the room?
Yeah, so we marked it. And if you count how many marks we have, that will tell you what camera we actually used. So we have one area here, second one here. This is 3, 4, 5. So that is the broadcaster rig that we used for this, hanging from the ceiling, so we also can actually have the floor in the image. And so the children were advised to stay within those areas. It looks a little bit wild. The room looks anyway wild, so you have to look for those tapes on the ground. And of course, the carpet helps us a lot here, and helps the performers a lot to stay within the cameras. And then we have, in each of those cameras, we have some of the performers. And at the beginning of the song, they're kind of still not sure what's happening, so they're still kind of doing their own stuff. Some are getting curious what's happening in the center. And then the ceiling is actually comped in post, and then where the lyrics were added to the ceiling. So the white ceiling was used in a very nice way by adding in additional information. Now here we have, so this was one of the times where we had the actor really come close. So we had him come close to the camera, and the question was, of course, how close can he come? So how do we do this coming close and then leaving the camera? We really went straight into the camera and told him, before you cross the seam, because you're going into the parallax area of this camera, you have to go back again and then move on to the next camera. So he was showing, follow me, that's what he's saying there, is follow me, and then he's moving into the next camera in the next frame. So he is now over in the second camera. So the action is moving around the room by going from camera, then the main character again is here, to the next camera, and then we're moving over to the fourth camera. And then we reverse this. So we're not going only in one direction, we're going into the other direction of this room. So the whole movement is mainly the main character moving. The children are moving around a little bit, but it's usually the main character, and that is who we're looking at because he is singing the song. And he's telling children what they need to do to be in the band. Now in this shot, the attention is all again towards the frontal position, and the children help us to actually find this position. They're all looking there. So if you would have looked around the room in the previous segment, we would have looked back here again to the center, because all of the children's attention is now focused towards the center. And then for the final, then from the center focus, actually, we move, he is calling onto the kids, and then the kids answer. So here in the set that the kid answer, we need to look where it is, where the children are actually in. We were proposing spatial sound. It was not within the timeline for this project to add spatial sound, because I thought that is a perfect example to actually have the spatial sound, because they say, I'm in the band, and then he says something else, and then some other kid says, I'm in the band. So that would have worked beautifully, but unfortunately it was not within the timeline for that project, because it needed to go live very soon. And then for the final scene, we are all into the camera. Everyone moved into the camera, so we are definitely going towards the final of this video. We're close by climax, and we have the teacher actually on the floor. So this was the main concern. They were asking, can we have someone below the camera? They wanted to have this scene in here. So that was the idea of actually putting the camera from the ceiling top down, so we can have this final scene. It was just for the last bit of the song, but a request by the client, so we try to make that happen. And final pose. And I must say this, we had about 8 takes with the full crew of performers, and every time they performed, they got a little bit better, and they got better. So the take that we actually took after a long day, and a long day for those children, was the last take. That was what it made. They just gotten better and better. And that's one of the advantages if you work with stage performers. They will perform every time you go. So this is one of the nice things, that they knew exactly what they needed to do. Of course, the first couple of takes where we were looking at facial expressions. So the director went in and said, okay, you need to smile more. You look really strange in this part. So we went to each of the children and told them, you're standing kind of weird in this one, so you make sure you adjust it. And they adjusted it, and we got a phenomenal take at the end. So hats off to those children, and also to the main performer here. I have one more example for you, and we're switching gears now completely. So for the first 2 pieces was one shot, one camera. Now we are moving to several shots with cameras in a lot of different locations. So we have actually an edit for this one. Challenges are sometimes similar, but each VR experience usually has different challenges. So this time we have a 10-second event, and we want to make a VR experience out of it. Because a rocket launch, it's 10 seconds, it blasts off and it goes. So how can we make a story out of this? Was part of it is telling the story of the rocket before it launches, of course. Unfortunately, what we couldn't do is actually tell the full story, because that starts 2 years before the rocket blasts off. It starts 2 years to be built, then all the parts being transferred and then assembled. So those parts we couldn't tell. But we can tell other parts. We can tell parts of the story of how big the site is, how big those objects are. So we will pick I think a lot of you already saw the rocket experience probably. Yes? Experience with hopefully with your uncle back. So a couple of constraints come with a rocket launch. You need to clear the path where the rocket is hours before the rocket actually launches. And because of security clearance, you only have 2 people on set. Then you saw the shockwave in the experience. You really need to make sure that the camera is in a position that it cannot move, that it's not blown away or blown over. And also, we need to make sure that the cameras themselves survive, and all of the cameras survived. So what we did, we used the Explorers, Freedom360 Explorer setup, and all the cameras survived. Nothing happened to the cameras. Got really dirty, and the dirt still needs to is still in there, but everything survived. Another challenge for the rocket launch is you cannot record sound where the rocket is. It's just, it will blow anything out. It's, I think, 64 times louder than a race car engine, 64 times. So the sound actually was recorded 3 miles away. Other challenges usually posed by the client is you want to be as close as possible. But they told us kind of was you need to feel like you have to feel for your life in the position that you're watching the rocket. So that was how close can we get to the rocket? Technological challenges we had. This was a night launch. We have completely dark sky. We're outside, we're not close to a city, completely dark sky, and then you have this blasting rocket on the other side. So that means we need to actually play with the exposure compensation. We need to compensate so we don't blow out the rocket, and we need to compensate that we have some structure still in the dark areas. Of course, you need to remember what side your camera is looking, otherwise you just messed up the whole thing. So the front part will compensate for the brightness and the back part for the darkness. And of course, the gear needed to endure the massive pressure wave. But as I said, this was beautifully done with the Explorer. The Explorer. Not even a rig broke. We didn't have a rig breaking. We didn't have a camera breaking. So we're all good afterwards with some dust. So one of the parts, as I said, the camera needs to be completely solid. So you see Jürgen filling up sandbags to make sure none of the cameras is moving when he is actually positions those cameras. And in another shot, he used, I think, 6 weights to make sure, instead of a pole, we didn't use a pole. This is aluminum weights, one stacked above the other, to make sure we don't get any vibrations on the pole. So 6 solid aluminum weights stacked on each other were serving as the pole in this situation. So let's go. So we want to tell a story about a 10-second event. So what can we do? We can tell the story around this area. So we can actually shoot other interesting areas and slowly converge to the rocket. So this was a shot that was not used. So we're here at a nice train bridge, kind of romantic light and so on. Unfortunately, that took the focus away too much from the rocket, didn't make it into the final shot. We used instead this establishing shot, and what you see in this shot is the building, or half of the building, where the rocket is actually built, assembled. The rocket is assembled in this building, so all pieces are brought in here. Rocket is assembled, payload is added in the weeks leading up to the launch. And we go from day to night, and then we move closer with the camera. And here we get a sense of the scale. We see the people. So this building is huge. And we see the scale of the rocket in this picture. And then this building starts to move. This is a moving building. The rocket stays where it is. The rocket is assembled on the pad. The building moves back. And that, I know when we watch it in the headset, it's kind of, what's happening here? Why I'm moving away from the rocket, and you're looking around and you're in the building. So this building is actually completely moving back. The rocket is where it's supposed to be. The building is moved out of the way for the launch. So this is then when we are already further back. I think it moves a little bit further back. This gives a little bit disorientation at the first when you watch it in VR, but it also helps. It is not, the motion is still is comfortable. I'm a little bit sensitive to motion sickness. I didn't get motion sick in this one. And I hope nobody else did that either. So some of the challenges now here. So here we have the camera. Obviously one camera was attached inside the building. We had several vantage points outside the building looking at the MST. That's what the building is called. And the rocket. So then between the building rolling back, let me go back for a second. Between the building rolling back and the pad clear, which means nobody is allowed in this area anymore, was 1 hour. And in this 1 hour, Jürgen and Matt needed to set up 5 different cameras. And some of those cameras were in the counterpart of this building, which is 28 stories high. So one of the cameras was on the counterpart of this building, on the roof, 28 stories high, somewhere at about 15 feet high. And so they had 1 hour to set up 5 cameras. So this is one of the other challenges. You don't have a lot of time. First, you wait and wait for the rocket launch, but when it really comes, when you need to clear the pad, you don't have a lot of time. You need to make sure the equipment works as it's supposed to be working.
Were there elevators?
No elevators, all walking stairs by your kids. And one vantage point, so another point that Jürgen picked out earlier to actually use as a camera setup was a lightning tower. Turned out they didn't use the lightning tower anymore. So you would have had to climb up this lightning tower, also about 28 stories high. But that lightning tower was not in use anymore, so there was no ladder to climb up anymore. So that one didn't work out. There was another vantage point he tried to get, was not possible. So this is one of the vantage points. This is on, now I forgot what the structure was called. It's about 10 meters high and close to the rocket. We get to see the launch in a nice view, and then we get all the debris. If you saw the experience, you see that after a couple of seconds, you actually don't see anything anymore. You have all the debris coming against you. The next vantage point for the rocket was a little bit further away, close to the flame trench. That's where you actually want the flames to go. You want to direct them there. So the second vantage point was also on the ground. And then the third vantage point actually was the vantage point on top of the building. So in this shot, we can then see how the rocket, we see all the dust and all the dirt going out to the bottom, and we can actually follow this rocket up and watch it go all the way. And this is then also the final shot of the experience. So how can we tell a 10-second experience? We show it a couple of times. We lead up to this experience. We show the scale of it. So at the point when you see the rocket blast off, you're already wow. You had a couple of wow moments getting to this point. And then we don't show you one time the rocket launch, we show it to you 3 times. And then we added a little bit something afterwards. So the directional sound actually was our idea, didn't come from the client. So the directional sound was our idea, and we found this stuff pack. I'm not sure who came up with it. Jörn came up with it. Jörn found it and said we need to use it for the rocket launch. So then that adds another component to the project, because you don't need only spatial sound, but you also need to mix the sound now for the stop pack. The stop pack reacts to some frequencies, lower frequencies, so you want it to react at the correct time, so you get the full feeling of the rocket launching. That is it for me, and let me know if you have some questions.
Okay, questions?
I have a question. On the field and when the actors were passing over the stitches, is that what they were doing, or how was that working? I wasn't clear on that.
So yes.
Could you elaborate a little bit on how that?
Yes,
I understand they were sectioned off.
Yeah, so the main character crossed over a lot. So there was cleanup work afterwards in the seams, but we try to keep it as simple as possible. One person, not 12 people, within a 5 minutes.
Really great work here. How bright is a rocket at night? And how dark is the desert?
It wasn't in the desert, it was actually in California, Vanderbilt. Let me see. I didn't do it. Oh, okay. Now we're back. Okay. Sure. So I wasn't at the rocket launch. I actually don't have the security clearance to be there. I was very sad. So I don't know how bright it is.
I guess my question is, how do you compensate?
How do you compensate? You use the exposure compensation on the GoPros. So you set it to the highest value you can set. Any other question?
Can you explain how you got the shot with the guy under the camera?
That was the broadcaster rig, and the broadcaster rig can be mounted from the ceiling. So the bottom camera was actually covering him completely.
Oh, so you just get to the same height with the same
Yes.
gravity?
Yes.
Did the director request a stitched version for him to look at? And how long did it take to stitch, and how did you show it to the director? Was he on a headset?
And we actually put stuff on the headset right away, so we had a couple of people with us. Have experience right now. So we were stitching on set. Took us a couple of minutes. Okay. So it took us a couple of minutes to stitch on set. We right away hand prepped it for the gear and put it on. With the caveat we explained, there's a lot of explaining still to do to the director, but that is the stitch lines there are still stitch lines in there. This is a grid stitch, and they mostly needed it to actually look at the faces and motion. So there was not so much about the stitch lines, but we also looked at the stitch lines to determine if someone stepped too far in, too far over one, or to the left or to the right. Any more questions?
Are you contemplating using false perspective in your next production?
Well, as I said, every project is different, and if it fits with the project, we will use false perspective. We're looking actually forward to using all the tools that people provide.
Okay, thank you very much.